Good afternoon and welcome to the August meeting of the Murfreesboro Historic Zoning Commission. Brenda, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Linda Anderson.
Here.
Gib Backlund.
Here.
David Becker.
Here.
Deborah Belcher. Rick Cantrell.
Here.
Paul Cross. Jim Thompson.
Here.
Mary May White. Howard Wilson.
Here.
I believe we do have a quorum, so we'll begin. Everyone should have received minutes of the last meeting held on April the 20th. Or were there any corrections or necessary edits? If not, the chair would welcome a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Move to accept the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of accepting the minutes as written, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes then are approved. It appears we have one bit of business. Robert, would you please introduce that?
Yes, sir, Chairman Thompson. Recently, there's been some discussion on the historic zone. There's been some talk about expansion, what exactly we want to do, where we want to do it. I've had some discussion with the planning director and the chairman, and we've come to a decision that we'd like to give you a little past history of the 24 years that the Historic Zoning Commission has been in effect. The planning director has been with the city for that long, if not a little bit longer. One of the members on board was planning director when the Historic Zoning Commission was adopted. And we're going to get them together today. Start with Joseph Adelot, who's the planning director, and he's going to give us a little bit of history on the commission itself and on the background to see where we would like to go and what we'd like to do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Adelot, for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much to be here. This is a good opportunity to maybe discuss where you've been and where you may want to go. Robert wasn't exactly historically accurate in what he said. Let's see. I think there was a different plan director when we adopted our historic zone, but Ricky was I think the assistant plan director and working in community development at that time. Bill Welcher's on board then, and I was a staff planner, and I was not very much involved with it. Although I do remember being part of a petition and counting the petitions in the ballot or whatever it was that we sent out and resent out and tried to make sense of. The historic zoning ordinance that creates the section in our zone ordinance that deals with historic zoning was adopted effective on November 14th of 1986, and at that same time we adopted the historic zoning map, and that is according to the research that Mr. Lewis did this morning. At that time, we had an area that was defined by the map. There was one addition to that along the way, and then there was one deletion. We added a property at the request of a property owner. We went through a zoning process, and that property was on Lytle Street. And then there was a later very controversial, very difficult process to delete a parcel because the property owner wanted it. And I'm sure most of you all, or at least some of you all, remember that and how that was a very awkward situation. Currently, there are 176 parcels that are in the historic zone, the Murfreesboro Historic Zone. And some of them have multiple buildings, but that's 176 parcels. From 1986, the effective date, through July of 2010, the Historic Zoning Commission has reviewed 307 applications. So that's more than one per parcel. But not every parcel has had any business come before you. 297 have been approved, that's 96%, and 10 have been denied, and that'd be 4%. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the activity. It's actually a amazingly small amount of activity for one of the boards that deals with land use in our community. I'm surprised that it was such a small amount. There have been numerous, and it's not counted, the number that have come before the planning staff. I know Mr. Lewis fields frequent calls throughout the week of people who have calls about the property, and the little things that people need to know about in order to make personal decisions or to move towards a project. So the actual staff activity is not really reflected in those numbers. This is coming up to be our 24th anniversary as a Historic Zoning Commission and as a, I guess, undertaken by the city. And it may be a good time for us to pause and take an inventory of how we've done and what we've been doing. And that's sort of what I want to engage the Historic Zone Commission in today. Mr. Lewis made mention of the idea of expansions to the boundary or as a possibility. I've always been subscribed to the idea that if before you increase what you've got, you might want to make sure that what you got you're doing well. And it may be that over the course of the next year, we may need to do some, before we try to expand our boundaries, we may want to take stock in how well we're doing and see if our current design guidelines or our guidelines that you operate under are currently calibrated correctly. 24 years have passed, and that's quite a number of years. The study of historic preservation has matured a little bit. I think there's a better awareness about how it can be done, about how it functions in the community. And it may be that we need to take a look at our design guidelines and see if they're achieving the objectives that we want to. We may need to see how pleased is the public, how pleased are the property owners who are subject to these. Are there ways that we can improve them? Are there ways that we need to update them to become more current in our way of doing business? Do we need to maybe contract our boundaries? Do we need to expand the current boundaries of our current district to include other properties? Or do we need to create different zones with different design guidelines? So I think these are things that we may want to consider before we just say that we want to expand their boundaries. Also, I think we need to take stock in the idea of, are we prepared for the rigors of going through an expansion process? Certainly, if the public doesn't want it, we wouldn't end up doing it. But are we prepared for the undertaking? It's my experience that historic zoning can be a very explosive question. And either there are some people that absolutely are against the idea. There's some people who embrace it wholeheartedly. And if we embark upon it, if it's staff-driven, it will fail. If it's something that Mr. Lewis and I are the primary people who are making the effort, it will fail. If it's the entire commission, if it's our city council, if it's our planning commission, if it is the people in the community that want to see it, it will succeed. As we've considered this, we have reached out to our local university, the Historic Preservation, or the Center for Historic Preservation, and talked with Dr. West about this. They're a great resource, and I think that they have some interest in maybe being a partner with us to study historic preservation in our community, to work with us to inventory our community as a whole, to see what kind of historic structures and qualities we have, not just the historic district that we currently have, but the entire city. Sometimes before you even start talking about historic preservation, you need to know what you got, and if it's worthy of some effort. And he was very interested in seeing some of his students have an opportunity to work in this and maybe help us to inventory very well. One of the resources that we talked about was our current GIS system. GIS, that's our Geographic Information System. It's much more than just pretty maps like the one we have on the board here. It's a database that we can collect data into and then be able to use. We have new data collection opportunities that we didn't have in the past using our cell phone technology. Right, let me see yours for a second. Mine is old style, but his is this. These kind of devices, they've got the ability to take photographs and then plug into our GIS system from the field, and it can be used as a tool to capture information. Photographs of the building, and then a drop-down menu, for instance. So by using the student labor and then having some of the planning staff coordinate their efforts in conjunction with the staff at MTSU and the Center for Historic Preservation, we could have a very good inventory throughout our community and possibly beyond that we could add to over the years. And it could be very interactive. Then we could probably see if we do need to expand from there. Meanwhile, I think that the staff at the Center for Historic Preservation could update us, and I think that it would be very helpful if they could come and visit with this commission, maybe even a committee appointed by our chairman to work on this. to maybe come back and report to the full commission about how we might need to consider changes to our guidelines and bylaws. Certainly, if we need to update them, we don't need to be waiting too long and having more time pass and more opportunities be missed. So that's part of what's on my mind. I'd like to see what's on your all's mind about this. Does this seem to be something you all are interested in?
Anyone from the board like to comment?
Well, obviously, Joseph, we're interested in most everything that you said. I'm not quite sure if we had an historic zone and a home in Las Casas that we would want to get our fingers out to such an extended area. Maybe we would have some input if there was something major going on with that particular property, but I don't know that we would want to bring something so far-reaching into it, but just my opinion. One of the things that has always crossed my mind, right now the historic zone, the Main Street Historic Zone is just residential properties, but I've been always curious as to why the historic downtown area was not part of an historic zone, and thought possibly you might have some reason why that never got included.
Well, two things on that. The first one is the issue of beyond our city limits. Actually, I think it's if you're creating a database, you shouldn't look at just the city limits as the limit of where you collect data. If you've got an opportunity to collect data, go into the urban growth boundary, at least to the extent of the urban growth boundary. And our urban growth boundary is quite a bit larger than our current city limits. Also, by having that data, we may be able to share it with other agencies who may also benefit. Rutherford County Planning, for instance. It may be something that they're interested in. So if the opportunity to collect data arises, I'd collect it beyond our city limits. Who knows? We may be annexing it at some point in the future. With regards to the downtown, that's an interesting thing. I think, and Mr. Cantrell, you were probably closer to it at the time that it was done and the decisions were made, but I think that the interest at that time was more towards the residential and less towards the commercial properties. That the Planning Commission and City Council recognized that the downtown had a value and a historic value. And later on, we worked towards the Main Street program for most of that area. But I don't think that there was as much interest from the owners of the property to see that area included into the historic zoning district under the jurisdiction of the Historic Zoning Commission. And I think that lies the answer. Mr. Cantrell, do you have any other recollections about that?
Well, I believe at the time we were also looking at putting together the Main Street program, and that the thought was that that entity would be active in seeing that we had preservation of the historic structures in the downtown area. Of course, at that time, the historic zoning district was an unknown and commodity, and there was a lot of work that went into getting those who are in there to accept turning over control of the architectural features of their properties. And so this felt like let's just keep it where we can get one going to start with. Now it's been 24 years since that time, and it would seem to me that it would be the responsibility of the Historic Zoning Commission today to go back and say, we did study a larger area. We have a track record of only 4% of denials coming about, which was the big fear. And do we need to just look at and study, not take, I don't know if it would go forward or not from here, but I know along certain streets in town there are still many homes that have features that I think if they were gone, the community at large would say, oh my gosh, why did we let those get away from us? And like one of the recent things we dealt with this year was the sidewalk issue. You know, we didn't include anything like that at that time. You know, and of course the outcry from the people in the neighborhood was, why didn't you do something to protect us? So would we be faced with that again if a house in the middle of a block that had homes that were of a certain architectural style, somebody comes in, takes a permit down, to remove the structure, and it's gone, and then the neighbors are saying, oh my gosh, why didn't the Historic Zoning Commission do something proactive instead of reactive again, and help us with this? Now, we brought up the Central Business District, or the square area. There's been some structures torn down there. I don't know that I'd particularly care to see many more removed without a plan to do something with them other than just turn them into a parking lot. I think you're really creating some voids then. So that's where my perspective is that, 24 years later, looking at it again and saying, back in 1986, we did study a broader area. We kept it compact till we had experience with it. And can we expand? Does the population want it expanded? Now, the property owner himself may say, I don't want my property included in that. He sells the property, new owner comes in, takes the structure down. The folks on either side of him, what's that done to their property values then, now that they've got a overgrown field, parking lot, or a structure that just doesn't become the neighborhood? So that's kind of where I am on this situation.
I certainly think the historic zoning was set up for the public good, to preserve what's unique in our town and to make sure that we, as good stewards, preserve it for the next generation. So I'd certainly like to, I think it has been successful in that respect. But we're certainly faced, when you look at the map between the East Main District and the hospital, that there's a lot of neighborhoods around the former site, what will soon be the former hospital, I guess. And I would hate to see what potential could happen if that site is developed in a harmful way that impacts the neighborhoods that are really right up against it. So I think this is the opportunity for us to, like you say, see what we've done right with this historic district and see how we might expand or contract this district, but then might we add other neighborhood districts, unique neighborhoods with separate guidelines. I know we've run into a couple of occasions where we have the Murfreesboro Historic East Main District and the National Register District, and they don't exactly line up, and we found some houses that are from the 60s and 70s and the 50s that just simply don't really look a lot like the houses on East Main, and do they need to follow the same guidelines? And so we have these other unique neighborhoods that have different styles of architecture, different ages, and they may have their own set of guidelines that would protect that neighborhood and that way of life. And so I think we have the East Main Historic District, and then we have the hospital site, and there's a lot all the way around that, and between those two areas that I think certainly ought to be considered and looked at. So, and it is part of our charter, our mission for the commission to look at other historic areas for the potential to set up historic neighborhoods. So I welcome being, if you will, audited to see how well we've done. I'd love to know if they can quantify, is being in the district, how has that area's property values increased? Is there, you probably can't tangibly link the two, but it'd be interesting to see, is the houses in the district, have they got a higher increase in value than perhaps neighborhoods that are just to either side of it? So I think there are a lot of values to having these districts, and I think we ought to look into how well we've done what we've done, and how can we increase it.
There's pardon me. Now, there's one other issue. Does a parcel have to be connected to other parcels to be in a historic, quote, district of some type? There are isolated structures, obviously, that may be in the community or in the urban growth boundaries that need to be preserved before they're torn down or looked at or considered, or amendments to them considered. I know there was one lost over across the interstate. The structure was. Now, it went down quick. Permit was taken out. Everything was done legally. But, do we need to look also at those types of structures and place them in historic venues so that they're not lost to the community?
I like the idea that you suggested of doing an inventory. I think that really precedes the some of the other steps that we're talking about, and having the Center for Historic Preservation do that work is an excellent idea.
I know that in Nashville, to pick up where you mentioned, Rick, is that they have gone apparently through the Metro Historical Commission and identified sites, and they are on the city's computers. So if you go to take out an application for construction or renovation, whatever you're going to do, it flags it. And so they then immediately, I mean, I've sat there while my drawings are being reviewed, they call the Historical Commission and say, we have this project coming in, do you have an interest in it? And they ask questions and perhaps review it, perhaps they don't. But that way you can do spot areas that are of interest, historic value, architectural, what have you, but not be in a district. That you could help monitor what is happening within your community that is not within a district that has guidelines and protective overlays to help monitor that. Do you all have the buildings, for instance, in East Main? Are they automatically flagged on the computer when somebody comes to take out an application for construction? Does it automatically say, wait a minute, you've got to go before the Historic Zoning Commission? I've always wondered that.
I don't think we have it flagged where it's a keyboard exercise. I think it's more of a mapping exercise. We do have the maps posted in several places in the office. And, of course, anybody getting a building permit has to come to the planning department. And that's the sort of thing we check out. Pretty much any kind of address on East Main Street, bingo. College Street, Lytle Street, the planning staff is on its toes to know about those as potential issues. Same way with Academy and College and Highland, particularly the address ranges where we're set. Something that's intriguing and about this standalone structures and parcels. With districts, you ordinarily look at more than one parcel, or at least a certain amount, or at least more than just a very small piece of land to call a district. And I know we've had the idea of what's called landmark structures and landmark objects and landmark trees and things like that, and landmark objects. There may be things more than just houses that may be significant, like fences. There are fences out there that were built with slave labor that may be very much worth preserving because they just don't make them anymore and they're not going to. But that's an example. Those things probably should be identified as well. And there may be more than one way to preserve it. So that's something that I think as we talk with the Center for Historic Preservation to find out those. I'm not as familiar with the techniques that are currently out there as I will be in the future as we go through this. And hopefully it would be an education opportunity for all of us to learn about. I truly believe that historic zoning has been good for our community. I believe that our Chamber of Commerce uses our historic zone as a recruitment tool. They use it as a good example of what Murfreesboro has to offer and how it cares about its community. I think it has been good for civic pride. I know that I always feel with a lot of pride as I drive down East Main Street and say, look at this street. It is as nice as there is, bar none. And I'm very certain that a lot of other people share that sentiment. You guys do. At least there's roughly 10 people in this room that share that. And there's probably more beyond these walls. I believe that there have been some improvements in property values. Some of the structures have had a lot of money spent on them, in large part because they were in a historic zone, because the owners realized the value of where they were, and they wanted to be part of it, and they understood going into it that it was going to be a rat hole, and it would never be filled up. But that was part of one of the attractions and also the consequences of living in a historic zone and having a structure that may be of that vintage.
Just to carry on the dialogue a little bit about, because we're just speaking freely about districts and overlays and architectural reviews, that at some meeting here we had the mention of the South Manny redevelopment district. And it should be thought when you're doing something like that, if it has been adopted, and maybe it hasn't been adopted, I don't know, or maybe it's just being studied, but a part of that perhaps should be, does it need to be placed in some sort of historic overlay classification? The city obviously is very interested in architectural review of new projects because they've developed the gateway overlay. And I'm not saying that the gateway area should be a part of historic zoning because it's just vacant fields for the most part. And it's, different venue, but it would just seem that you would want to think about that when you're looking at new overlays and/or redevelopment districts and say, okay, do I need to do something additional other than just talk in this vacuum? And I'm not saying it's really a vacuum, but with the Planning Commission, do you engage the Historic Zoning Commission also and give that a consideration when you're doing these things?
Well, just to help you there, we have not created a South Manning redevelopment district. It's been something that's bounced around as a concept and an idea. But we very much want to lay the groundwork for redevelopment of a very positive nature in the South Manning area, where we're, and actually the whole Manning Avenue, where we're fixing to invest a substantial amount in redevelopment or reconstruction of the street. We're going to, y'all, wasn't there a presentation about the project?
There was.
And y'all have seen it, so y'all know that what we're doing is we're basically rebuilding that street bottom up. Actually, I understand it's really a utility project, and we're just going to pave over it. But when we get through paving over it, we're going to build nice sidewalks and landscaping and on-street parking and also stormwater elements that are a little bit unique, that are going to be good examples to our community. But your concept's good, Mr. Cantrell. That's something we haven't totally dismissed, the idea of what can we do, that Manning Avenue is, that we're not going to just walk off and leave it after we get through paving it.
And is that about to begin, that the rebuilding of the streets and the sewer systems? And
we're in the process of bidding it in the next couple of weeks.
it seems like it is timely for us to think about the entire Manning Avenue area, since that work is being done and the city is spending so much money on that, for us to maybe move on studying if that's a part, if that could be a separate district, if that could be in the Main Street Historic District, and it might be a good time, well, I know it would be a good time to connect with the MTSU Historic Preservation Department so that maybe we can start thinking about surveys, questionnaires that could be sent out to residents, and maybe at the same time, I mean, I'm not saying we should decide to do the square in the retail area, but that might be a way to find out if there's any interest. If we did come up with some kind of a survey to find out if people in the area are pro or con about this.
I think even town hall meetings would be potentially good, where people could come and discuss, their concerns, their desires, and that we could, with the questionnaires, respond to that.
I would think that an isolated parcel, just placing an overlay on it, would not be construed nearly the same as a spot zoning of a specific classification. Because you haven't changed its use, which is typically what the spot zoning is about, is the use of that property being granted differently than its neighbors.
Granting a privilege or is one thing. That's where you probably come into the debate on spot zoning, that you're granting a privilege to a property owner that you're denying to others that are similarly situated in the same locale. But the other side of the equation is, are you exacting from them a requirement that you wouldn't do to other similarly situated parcels in the same locale? And that may be the flip. That's maybe the spot zoning in reverse, and that's something to be cautious as well. Part of what I think is that these discussions are good now, but I think that they will mature a little bit as we embark upon a little bit of visioning with the in dialogue with the public. Our community is enjoyed by everybody. The public streets are everybody's public streets. The historic zone is everybody's historic zone. It just seems that some people reside in it and own property there, but the entire community owns it. So the city has a stewardship responsibility there. And that's why we have a public board that the city has appointed as a historic zone commission to deal with properties there. But I think we need to get the public dialogue going. I've not got a specific course of action to lay out, as in, this is what I want to do, and this is what we're going to do over the next course of the next several months. But I think one of the things that I do want to undertake will be some, at least one, maybe multiple, neighborhood meetings. Fairly recently, we had back in the spring, we had a meeting with the property owners who own property in the medical zones, where we talked about changing the medical zones to allow for some changes of use. And as a result of that, we were able to get some really good input and also get the buy-in from the public to make some changes. And after that, we have rezoned 4 areas. Actually, one of them still in the process of being rezoned. But we rezoned 4 areas to allow for a broader range of uses. We changed the uses permitted in our office general zone. And we've also created some regulations that deal with tea houses and also impact the bed and breakfast. So out of those public meetings, we were able to get input that helped us to understand that there was a need to make some changes, also that there was public support to make those changes, and it also made the Planning Commission more willing to accept the recommendations of staff when it came before them. So I think that a similar approach with what we're talking about with historic zoning. While some people will make it very unpleasant, there'll be other people who make it a very rewarding effort. So over the course of the next several months, I'd like to have one of these meetings. And when we have it, I would call upon you folks to be part of the meeting. I think by virtue of you being on this board, I think you have a responsibility to participate. Participate by attending, by getting the word out, and by being supportive in the effort. If not, although I wouldn't want to tell you what your script is, and that's not my role, but I want you to participate in the process. I think that you have a responsibility that when the time comes to be part of it. We would also want to use this board, and this body rather, and our opportunity to get word out. When we can talk about it on television, the public watches this program, and they have an opportunity to learn in doing that.
So I think we've, just to go back a little bit, I think what we've done is we've identified a few things to begin looking at. And one would be those properties that are on the National Register but not in the local historic district. Those areas that are on the fringes of the current district, including the area around the hospital that you've just mentioned, where you've gone through and made some use changes, and obviously they're connected to the current zoning district, as well as the South Manny area where you've talked about a redevelopment plan of some type, thinking, this is another gateway into the current historic zoning district. And then we've talked about the commercial areas of town, meaning the central business district area, and whether or not that should be. And then those structures or landmarks, as you put them, that are outside and disconnected perhaps from an actual district as such, but are isolated to some extent as a parcel or a landmark that stands to itself. And would you do in an individual parcel district as such? And that's kind of, how do you start to study an area? That would be the things that I think that we've mentioned here as a way to begin.
Well, actually, I think you got ahead of the script. I think we need to look at our district we've got now and find out, number one, are our design standards and bylaws and guidelines calibrated correctly? Are we doing the right things with what we've got?
Well,
Before we seek the public input on expanding the district, I think we need to seek the input, are we doing it right, what we got? And is there an interest in expanding? Do we need to consider how well we're doing? I think you always got to start there before you talk about expansion when it comes to this sort of thing.
Well, I think the inventory would be the first step before, and an inventory would not necessarily require expansion. It's just an inventory. It's a list of what's out there. The other thing that Rick did not mention was those properties that may be eligible for National Register status or districts that may be eligible but have not been identified, and that's what the inventory would do.
I may have missed something that you were meaning, Mr. Cantrell, and I want to tell the commission, I'm interested in doing the inventory, come what may.
Well, that's really where I was headed, was the inventory. What do you inventory? You know, and you got to shrink it down somehow to begin, and it may expand or contract from there.
One of the things I've found often is with Mr. West, or Dr. Vest, whatever his title is, I'm not sure right now, but Van has a lot of insight about how to go about doing things right. He puts together a good program when he undertakes something. I have a lot of confidence that when we sit down with him again and discuss it further, because we had a very good conversation with him a couple weeks ago about what could be and what their department has to offer. But sit down and talk about a specific scope of what we would expect. We talked about the technology. We even talked about getting some, maybe even into next budget year, some funding for some part-time workers as a possibility. So he was going to step back and do a little thinking about what kind of program. And it's consistent with what you're saying. Part of what we want to do is find out what we got and what we could do. But also, I think one of the things he talked about was, and I hadn't really thought about it as much, but with the passage of 24 years since we adopted our program, there have been some advances in the way historic zoning is thought of, the way it's handled, how it's administered. And maybe by looking at how we're doing, we could improve what we are doing and the results we're getting. Does that make any sense to you?
I would think when you look at what's going on within the district, that some of the properties that would have demolition aspects by neglect would be the one thing that jumps out in my mind as to where we have a weakness. The deterioration of some of the structures that are allowed to happen, they're just on the fringe of having to be demolished or condemned, or or maybe not that to that extent, but we probably don't do as good a job right there. Obviously, the numbers you gave earlier at the beginning about the number of parcels that are in there, the number of reviews that occur, the number of denials, and all that, it means that the property owners have been working with the commission, and the commission working with the property owners for 24 years. So there's 4% is a low number, quite frankly.
Oh, I think it is. 10 haven't been denied over 24 years. And I know one of them had to do with a parking lot in a building that was later demolished anyway. But as a result, we got a much better structure than we would have because we didn't need a parking lot at that location. And I can't remember, because I haven't been as closely involved, just exactly what the ins and outs were of the ones that were denied, except for I do remember the one that involved a building on the corner of Academy and Main Street.
And there may have been some of them that were denied that later came back with something different and actually got approved, so that the denial, even still it's on the record, turned into an approval.
One thing that's good about historic zoning is that, and any kind of review process, is it causes people to stop and think. One of the things I found from a plans review perspective, and some of our greatest successes have not been that we've had regulations that force someone to do something, but we had a chance to talk with them and convince them to do it a better way than they originally thought about it.
The chairman brought up about property values, and I think one thing I would just be something I would think have happened is it certainly hasn't deteriorated property values. I think that has probably not happened because the property has been in a historic zoning district.
No.
Whether or not it proves that it had a benefit to its value, don't know that answer.
I think in driving to and from work, I work in Nashville, I believe I saw I can't remember where it was, but a sign, a billboard that showed a picture of East Main talking about Murfreesboro. And I was like, here is an advertisement of East Main, and it's like, well, it is our part of our front door, it's part of our heart of our city, and I think that's why it is special and why we need to preserve it. But I think there are other wonderful neighborhoods that the city's been investing sidewalks, and I forgot which street north of here, sidewalks and curbs and all this, and it makes the neighborhood look great. I'm sure it must make the neighbors take more pride in their own property, and I would love to see the development of that pride in their neighborhood, and by creating these districts that I think can help move that along. You've talked with Dr. West. Is it something you think we could have him come back before this commission next month? Did he give you a timeline of when he thought he might have some additional thoughts that he could come talk to us? Or
He didn't give us a timeline, did he?
He
But
was
part
doing some things.
of what his situation is, his obligations that he's got usually are on 6 months to a year into the future. And then looking at knowing that if he were to undertake a program with the city, he wants to be able to devote the energies, the staffing, and his resources to it, so it's done first class, bar none. And that's the absolute characteristic of a van. So what he indicated was that we need to begin the process. And what I told him was I wanted to come and talk to you folks a little bit about it. And then looking into next year, probably next semester, the winter semester is when we'll really begin to get something begin to happen, with the idea that into the summer and maybe into next fall, that'd be fall of 2011, we would actually have the students begin to be able to get into the field and begin to do the inventories. One thing that occurs to me is it's best to take photographs of structures when the foliage is gone. So you don't want to do it in the middle of July because you won't be able to get as good photographs. A lot of the foliage will obscure the architectural elements. So it's going to be critical that we have a good database. So we'd probably be putting it on there. That fits in good with my time frame because I have zero funding for any kind of part-time labor to do it this year, and that would be all the way through June 30th. Hopefully, if things begin to show that there's support for this effort, and I think there will be, we can be able to get some modest funding for some part-time people to be out and start inventorying. And these guys are usually given some real good instruction from Dr. West and his staff on how to do it. I probably would want them to begin in one area where they could learn how to use the equipment and then get to the more important parts later. But generally, they've got some pretty good training, and they've got someone who's giving them oversight to make sure they do a good job. And then the inventory would go amazingly quick. And they would use resources. And, some of the things that they may catch besides the fences, cemeteries, those things are so important, people forget about them. And they may have to do a little research to find out where they're at, because those are the kind of things you may have to tromp around in some undergrowth to find out where it's at. Unless the developers will just step far and tell us where they're at, because most of them have already been found by them. But anyway, that's sort of my time frame, is to begin the discussions again with him after the first of the year.
When we first did this study, I think there was a category within the CDBG guidelines that allowed some use of those funds. I don't know if that still exists today, but I think that's how we did compensated for the very first study.
It's my recollection that was the case, that was part of, that the funding for the first study was with the community development funds, because I was here working on a land use study, and Mr. Sturdivant was working on the inventory for the historic zoning. And we were both part-time employees at the same time. We didn't work together, but we ran into each other quite a bit. But I don't know if that's still available, or if our current community development director has any interest in sharing his funding. He's buying buildings in Smyrna right now.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I wonder if of course, we're so lucky that we have Dr. West and the department. I wonder if there's something that we as a commission need to be doing as far as reviewing our bylaws and the restrictions before we meet with him. I feel like the first of the year is, now that we've decided to do something, I don't know if we should, if there's something we could be doing before he can meet with us, or if there's someone else in his department who could meet with us.
It might be good if
That's
we
a
have a
question.
conversation with him to tell us what he thinks we should be
Yeah.
looking at on
Yeah.
our own. Yeah, yeah. We can make contact with him and see what he might suggest.
By all means, I think we'll probably get him to come back and visit with you, but really for him to get going in earnest will be after the first of the year. But I think he'd be very glad to come down and speak with us. In fact, we
think
did
that'd
talk
be
about that
great.
as a possibility.
I think having him come down would be another opportunity for the public to hear what he has to say in the process. So the more the public hears about it, the more they understand about it, and it's not some big gray something they don't understand, that it's more discussed and out there for them to hopefully then support. I would welcome him coming back
Yes.
to talk to us myself. Any other comments of the commission members?
I think I have one. Rick mentioned the National Register, that there are some buildings in our town that are on the National Register. And how are those denoted? How do we know? If we drove by something, does the city do some kind of signage?
The owner can place a plaque on a building if they like, but there is a database of National Register properties. In fact, at the Heritage Center on College Street, they have a couple of notebooks with properties in the county that are on the National Register. So, also, I believe the Rutherford County Archives has been working on developing photographs of historic properties in the county. I'm not sure if they're doing it for themselves or if it's for another agency, as well as I think they're documenting cemeteries, so you could check with the archives and the Heritage Center.
Yeah, I just wonder if that's something that we should look into, so that for those, like, for instance, isn't Oakland's on the National
Yes,
Register?
National Register.
And,
Whether or not it's a
and is it
landmark.
denoted? I don't know. I don't
Well, the
think it is.
APTA goes around and puts up markers in people's houses that, and they do, I saw in the paper, I think over the weekend, they put up 4 a year
Okay.
of historic houses. And to be on the National Register, or to be eligible, you only have to be 50 years old, the structure. It could be a house, it could be a barn, it could be a wall, it could be a monument, anything. To be eligible, and that somewhat carries similar protections just to be eligible, but to be on the National Register, there's no marker that they themselves place, but the APTA does
Okay.
have their signs out front, and they're supportive of each other, but they're not the same listing, if you will.
Okay.
But there is, you
I
can't
thought
go
maybe there was something the city did or could do
Oh.
as far as a marker. I didn't know. That's my question.
We can't put the signs on the private property.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, one thing we can do, and one thing we have done with our Blackman land use plan and our Southern Pike land use plan, we did inventory the structures that were on the National Register using that database and identified them on some of the maps so that anybody looking at those studies would know about them. And there were any kind of planning effort like that, we're going to consult that
Okay.
to see if we can make sure that kind of information is known. That's just part of good planning.
Good.
But, for instance, Linda, I'm on the State Review Board for National Register nominations, and we have been lately doing a lot of cemeteries and monuments and odd things, not the big, large house. We're looking at everything that's
Fences and-
anything. If it's something extremely unique or unusual, but we've been listing them.
Great.
So it's not just the typical house. Yeah. Anything else anybody would like to bring up? Howard?
So will we ask Dr. West to meet with us next meeting?
I'll call him and see if it'll work in his schedule, and if it
Or maybe
can,
we
I'll
should,
get on.
yeah, and if it won't, maybe we could accommodate him.
I'll ask
sometime.
him when we can.
Well, before we do that, we will, Ms. Anderson, we're going to do something different. We're not going to make it next meeting unless we're ready. Staff will consult with him and find out what he's able to do, and we'll be back and either have him with us or we'll report back to you. We're not going to let the subject drop, but I won't guarantee we'll have his presence here yet.
I thought if we needed to be thinking about looking at our guidelines for the historic zone, like you said, let's be sure we're doing things right before we even think about enlarging or adding to.
Yes, ma'am, but I want to have a chance to consult with him and find out his availability and what's on his mind before we bring him before you to a full-blown discussion.
Okay.
We're not going to let the subject drop, though.
Okay, that's what I'm concerned about. Okay.
But if we're going to do, wouldn't we be doing a self-analysis of our own guidelines and procedures to see if they meet current requirements? I mean, Dr. West wouldn't necessarily be involved in that, I wouldn't think. But we've done that to a certain extent on certain issues like fences, where we went out to other historic zones and asked for their guidelines on it to compare theirs against what we had. So I would think that that's something we can do this fiscal year on our own. And then, because any changes have to go in front of the city council to be approved. Isn't that correct?
Yes, one of the things I had in mind that might be a good way to approach it is for there to be a subcommittee of the Historic Zone Commission to work with staff, maybe a little bit more flexible. Maybe 3 of the group, still enough to require advertisement for any kind of meetings, but it might be a little bit more flexible rather than having the whole group to meet on this subject so quickly. And then work towards a recommendation back to the entire group just for study.
And isn't that something we can do almost immediately?
Another possibility for folks on the commission is that there's a lot of educational material available from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They're having their annual meeting in Austin, I believe, in October. And so if you want to know more about how historic districts are working in other parts of the country, or standards for fences or cemeteries or any number of topics, they have a huge amount of literature available. And it's available online as well as at the conference, where they have all kinds of meetings about people who talk just about this sort of thing.
How do we set up a subcommittee to meet? Or when would you suggest that we do that?
I'm not sure I am ready to do it today, but I think that we would have our chairman appoint a subcommittee to work with staff to report back. That'd be the ordinary protocol that a committee like this or a board or a commission would take. That's exactly the way we would do it with the planning commission.
Do you just set a time and a place, or do you have to have a public notification? Or
Because it would involve more than 2, or at least it would be involved more than 1, we would have to have public notification. But that's no big deal. We do things in the open anyway. So we would have a meeting in probably room 218 is where we'd meet. And yes, any public meeting that's advertised, the public's welcome to attend.
Okay. Is there anything else we'd like to discuss today?
We'll be back with some recommendations in this regard.
But thank you very much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it, and we're excited about the process and moving forward on this. Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, the chair would welcome a motion to adjourn.
Take that motion to adjourn.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Jim, you're on the